Hey, it's me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and I'm back again with my Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis videos. It's been a long time since I've done these, I think like 2 months. But anyways, I'm back and I'm starting off with Fortune Ladies. Fortune Ladies are a 5D's archetype, and in complete honesty, they were pretty bad. You could still argue they're kinda bad now, but they're more playable than they used to be. Anyways, let's get started. First off, this deck has decent monsters in the form of Fortune Lady Every, Fortune Lady Water, Fortune Lady Light, Fortune Lady Fire, and your Fortune Lady Tuner monster. This deck also has good spells and traps, or at least a trap. This deck is fairly consistent, and this deck can gain field presence fairly easily. And it also has decent protection in the form of, I think, your Searcher, your continuous spell, which is also a Searcher, and yeah, that's just about it. Also, as far as gaining field presence go, it's usually due to the card called Future Vision, which I think is still pretty unsearchable since it's not a Fortune Lady card, and there's not a single Fortune Lady that searches Fortune cards in general. And for the cons, this deck is very reliant on Future Vision to an extent, and also you need to get to your Fortune Lady Light to actually perform your combos. And when I say combos, I mean your basic combo. And the second con is it generally can't play through a negate, because this deck is fairly normal summon reliant. Which is also why you desperately need a card like Future Vision on the field, so that way you just normal summon your future Fortune Lady Light and you can actually get off your plays. Even that one spell in this deck that allows you to special summon a Fortune Lady from your from your deck requires you to control at least one Fortune Lady monster on the field. So if that normal summon gets disrupted, this deck kind of falls apart. For power, I'd give this deck a 2 out of 5. For defense, a 2 out of 5, because this deck is actually able to protect your Fortune Ladies from, I think, attacks as well as certain types of effects. This deck has somewhat decent recovery, so I gave it a 2.5, but to be more accurate, it's probably a 2 out of 5. For versatility, I give this deck a 2 out of 5, and for consistency, I give this deck a 3.5 out of 5. And I think this deck overall is a tier 3 deck. Next, we have Kozmo. Kozmo being a former meta deck that came out, I think, after Duelist Alliance. For Kozmo, for the pros, this deck can OTK, it can float, it has good protection, meaning that you can't target most of their main deck monsters with card effects. And this deck has decent card removal options in the form of Dark Destroyer and Cosmojo. This deck is also fairly consistent, and this deck is also fairly versatile. I guess I should say this deck is versatile. Anyways, for the cons, this deck lost 2 E-Telly, and it generally can't play through more than 2 negates, since as powerful as this deck is, it can't really play through negates all that well. And I know you can technically say that about a lot of decks. And for power, I give this deck a 4 out of 5. For defense, a 3.5 out of 5, mostly due to the floating as well as the targeting protection. As far as recovery, I give it a 2.5 out of 5. For versatility, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. And for consistency, I give this deck a 3 out of 5. So far, I would say that this deck is a tier 2.5. This deck still has meta potential, but I would say it got drowned out, and it's also been replaced by a newer meta. This deck didn't really get hit all that much, in my opinion, before. So I'm surprised this deck didn't see a lot more play, especially during the time Sky Strikers and I think Salamangreats were running around. Anyways, next up we have Sunavalon. I tried playing this deck a few months ago, but it was very difficult to get. It was very difficult to actually record some duels because of this, because this deck is, in complete honesty, is pretty bad. Anyways, also to sum up this deck, it's a plant link archetype that came out in the Vrains era. I mean, technically it came out after Vrains, after the anime ended, but this is basically a deck from the anime. Anyways, for the pros, they have good main deck monsters, with the exception of Genus Loki. And this deck has good plant support to back it up, and this deck can potentially OTK. And for the cons, this deck is ironically frail. If you don't know about this archetype, it was used in the anime, and the whole gimmick was that this archetype was pretty defensive. But it's pretty frail in the game, since not only can you easily remove cards without having to battle them or destroy them by card effects, it like this strategy could easily fall apart because your opponent could just, use their unicorn to spin it back into the deck. However, I do think there's like one monster in the main deck that actually protects from targeting, but your chances of having it are very low. Another problem with this deck is it can brick, especially since most of its plays rely on a single normal monster. This deck lacks protection outside of battle, like I mentioned, which makes it ironically frail, which goes against its whole gimmick in the first place. It relies too much on Loki, and it's really bad going second. The best thing you can do with this deck is go first, hope your opponent doesn't kill you, and hope they don't get rid of your Link 1 or your Link 4. Or if you actually get lucky, you can actually summon Link 4 turn 1 and then get your searchable skill drain, and that's just about it. And then potentially OTK them on your turn. For power, I give this deck a 3.5 out of 5. Yes, you can technically get your Sunvine Thrasher to a really high attack and just OTK your opponent. 4,000 attack is nothing really to scoff at, but this deck isn't able to consistently do that, which is why I give this deck which is why I give power a 3.5 out of 5. For defense, I give it a 2 out of 5. It's really good against decks that don't really like to use card effects to remove cards on the field. Cough cough War Rocks. And for recovery, I give it a 2 out of 5. For versatility, I give it a 1.5 out of 5, since this deck is generally a one-trick pony, since most of the time you're just going to be using Thrasher. You're going to be using Thrasher just to win and close out games. And for consistency, I give this deck a 2.5 out of 5. I give the consistency, I put consistency this high because technically there are many ways you can actually get to your Loki, but it doesn't feel worth it just so you can use that one monster for most of your strategy. And even then, it doesn't really consistency allow you to access your win condition, since you would need to either summon Dryad Triniad on your first turn, or just go for the Link 1 and hope your opponent doesn't kill you. So because of that, I would say that this deck is a tier 3.5. I feel like with a little bit more support, I feel like this deck can actually be a very powerful deck to actually contend with. Also, like I mentioned when reviewing the new Sunvine cards, or at least Sunavalon cards, the new Sunvine spell card should have slapped on some additional effects like protection against card destruction, because just being able to tribute a single monster you control just so you can summon a Sunavalon from your graveyard with its effects negated isn't really a good effect. It really is not. And I feel like they should have added more, especially in a deck this frail. And that's all I have to say about Sunavalons. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about these three decks. And it's been me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and I'm out.